Welcome to DEF CON 3. I'm KT McFarland. Chinese pro-democracy demonstrators have taken to the streets in Hong Kong, and the Chinese media, state-owned media, has said that it's all the fault of the Americans. Joining us now to make some sense of this is Dr. Michael Pillsbury, a senior fellow of the Hudson Institute and former Reagan administration official. Thanks for joining us. So what do you think? It's all the Americans' fault?
It's not all our fault, but we're partially involved. We have a large consulate there that's in charge with taking care of the Hong Kong Policy Act passed by Congress to ensure democracy in Hong Kong. We also have funded millions of dollars of programs through the National Endowment for Democracy to help democracy in Hong Kong. So in that sense, the Chinese accusation is not totally false.
But what about the new Chinese leadership? It seems like Xi Jinping, the new leader of China, is consolidating his power. How does all of this affect his position, his consolidation of power? Isn't this really a challenge to him?
It is a challenge to him, and the student leaders in Hong Kong seem to understand that. Over the weekend, they've been asking for him, President Xi, to reply to their open letter to him to try to make President Xi responsible for democracy in Hong Kong in the future. This is a very shrewd move on the part of the students, and they're going back to 1989 when the very same kind of letter was sent. And China's leader then, Zhao Ziyang, did answer them and say democracy will come to Hong Kong someday. They're using that letter as a kind of promise from the Chinese leadership. So they're trying to draw President Xi into this, and he very much wants to let the Hong Kong government be in charge and separate himself from the demonstrations.
Well, the demonstrations, a week ago, 10 days ago, people thought they would fizzle out, and they haven't fizzled out. And now there are groups attacking the pro-democracy demonstrators. Who are those groups? Are they government-led?
Well, it's somewhat mysterious. Many of them apparently speak only Chinese Mandarin, not Cantonese, the local dialect in Hong Kong. So the idea is that they may be coming in from the outside, somewhat like Putin sending forces mysteriously into the Ukraine and then denying that he's doing it. This is a dangerous development because they are using force against the students and then mysteriously sort of fading back into the crowd. This is somewhat of a mystery so far.
You know, my former boss, Henry Kissinger, and I know he's a friend of yours as well, he said that you have to understand the current generation of Chinese leadership is afraid more than anything of instability in China, that they were the young teenagers during the Cultural Revolution and the chaos in China in the late 60s and early 70s, and they are more afraid of instability and chaos in China than really anything else. So they are not going to let this movement grow. What's your comment?
I think that's partially true, but we know from a lot of declassified records that have come out from the 1989 events that there was a powerful group in Beijing that wants to sort of lighten up, have more political reform, more economic reform, not stick with the old Leninist model. And this group was pretty much put in jail for life or expelled from the country as a result of 1989. The hawks, the really hardliners, took over at that point. And that kind of debate can break out again. There's reason to believe there's some people like that, at least in the think tanks and universities in Beijing. They keep getting arrested. That's one reason we know that they're there. So this sort of thing has a potential to rekindle the debate inside Beijing at the very top over how much political reform is a good idea. That's why it's so important President Xi made this secret speech, it's been disclosed last year, saying that Gorbachev and the collapse of the Soviet Union only took place because nobody was, quote, man enough to stop Gorbachev and the reforms. So the implication is he is man enough to stop the reformers inside China. But the Hong Kong demonstrations, of course, challenged his sense of control.
Well, are the United States and China on a collision course as China rises?
No, certainly not. There are sort of moderates in both Washington and Beijing who wring their hands over every daily crisis and try to find some way to get along. I wouldn't think conflict's inevitable at all. The problem is whether misperceptions on both sides, miscalculations in the South China Sea, for example, get out of hand, and suddenly those who had tried to be the managers of U.S.-China relations are embarrassed and look like fools, and then the hawks on both sides move toward confrontation. This scenario is explicitly described in Henry Kissinger's book on China. In the last chapter, he talks about a major war coming if hawks on both sides get control.
So how do you think this current round of demonstrations in Hong Kong ends?
Well, that's a good question. Back in April, May of 1989, everybody forecast these million students in the middle of downtown Beijing are going to go home Summer's coming. They're tired. They're not going to last. And everybody was wrong. The demonstrations got much bigger. And then the hawks were able to manipulate information and say, these young students want to kill us. They want to overthrow our power structure. If that happens in Hong Kong, this will be a much greater crisis in 2 or 3 months. So far, everybody's predicting these students are all going to go home. It's down to just 1,000 now in a few tenths. So 1,000 is a long way from 1 million.
So it either ends like in a fizzle or in a bang. Well, thanks
That's
so
right.
much. Thanks for joining us. Dr. Michael Pillsbury of the Hudson Institute. And that's it for DEF CON 3.